Hello, and welcome to the next episode in our Gifted Education series. In this edition, we're going to be reviewing a couple of books that I find particularly beneficial for parents who have students that are high ability or gifted and talented. My name is Dr. Jo Tuite, and I direct the Office of Admissions here at the Indiana Academy for Science, Mathematics, and Humanities. I've worked in the field of gifted education for about 35, 36 years, and have been very fortunate to be able to follow my passion in doing so. So again, we're going to jump right in and take a look at some of those books that I would highly recommend. So as you can see on your screen, I have the list of books that we're going to be reviewing in this episode. When you signed up, you probably recall that there were only 3 listed, but I've added a bonus today. So we are going to be talking about Gifted Children Decoded, Doing Poorly on Purpose, Raising Twice Exceptional Children, and then your bonus today, A Parent's Guide to Gifted Children. So the structure I'll be using today, I'll first go through the table of contents with you, then I'll share with you what I think are kind of the key highlights, and then I'll share a couple of samples that I'll read directly to you from the book to kind of let you hear the content in the author's own voice. So that's the structure we'll be using today. So as I mentioned, the first book that we're going to talk about is Children Decoded. You can see there on your screen the contents, and these are broken down by, I believe in this book, they are broken down by chapters. So there's understanding giftedness, emotional well-being and resilience, social skills and relationships, educational advocacy and support. Let me advance the screen here for you. Practical strategies for home and school. Parent self-care and resilience. Parents, this is an important chapter for you all. For all of us, I guess. The next one then is long-term development and future planning. So again, that's how this book is broken down, the different chapters and the topics that we'll be covering. So some of the key highlights for this particular book are, I find it to be very easy to read. It's broken down logically, but then the content within each section is easy to read. It's not using a lot of technical lingo. It's kind of that down-to-earth type writing that makes it easier to follow along. I love that it has kind of some built-in practical helps, and then the foundation in gifted education is very solid. So you don't have to be concerned as you're reading this book that you're not getting good research-based information. It has a solid foundation. And then one of the things that I really love about this is at the end of, I think it's at the end of every chapter, or just about every chapter, there's a section called Pause and Reflect. So it's kind of a self-guided reflection through what you have just read. So the first sample I want to provide you comes from chapter 3, which is social skills and relationships. And I'm going to kind of jump ahead in that chapter to section 3.3, which is actually talking about peer relationships and navigating friendships and social dynamics within those relationships. So again, I want to read to you in the author's voice. Guiding your children in making friends involves encouraging shared activities that align with their interests. If your child loves science, consider enrolling them in science club or a robotics team where they can meet peers with similar passions. Teaching simple conversation starters can also help. Encouraging your child to ask open-ended questions is a great way to help them engage with peers and foster meaningful conversations. These types of questions invite more detailed responses and allow children to explore common interests and learn new things about others. And then it goes in to provide some examples of some of those open-ended questions that you can talk to your kiddos about utilizing in their friend and relationship development. As a couple of examples, and there's a good list. I'll just read you a couple of them. Starting off with something that kind of draws all teens particularly together is, what kind of music do you like listening to? What's your favorite thing to do after school? If you could have any superpower, what would it be? I really love that question. Parents, what would your superpower be? Actually, I think being a parent is a superpower. And then, what's something you're good at? Again, there are lots of questions here. And then, by asking these questions, your child can open up conversations that lead to deeper connections, helping friendships develop naturally over time. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of what they're talking about, at least in that section of chapter 3. While I mentioned that that particular one was coming from a section on peer dynamics, there are multiple sections within each of these chapters. So, for example, another section in there is about teaching empathy and developing effective communication skills. And so forth. So lots of fantastic information within each of these chapters. And like I said, it's very well written. So let me jump ahead to another section. I'll just kind of give you a sample from. I think as parents of high ability gifted students, being able to advocate for them within the school systems, as well as on larger scale, state and national levels, is really important, so that we're making sure that their needs are being met. And chapter 4 in this book is called Educational Advocacy and Support. And it breaks it down really nicely and gives some very easy to do practical tips. So let me jump in and share a little bit, again, in the author's voice. So I'm going straight to section 4.1, which is the ART of advocacy, building essential advocacy skills. And it starts off with saying, advocating for your gifted child involves mastering several key skills, which I like to call the ART of advocacy: assertiveness, research, and tenacity. Each component is crucial in ensuring your child's needs are met within the educational system. Assertiveness ensures your voice is heard. Research gives you the necessary knowledge, and tenacity helps you persist even when challenges arise. And then it goes on to break each of those down with a little bit more in depth of what the author means, and then provides you some practical steps. They also provide in this chapter an advocacy checklist to kind of help you stay organized and to be focused. So let me read to you a couple of the examples from this checklist. And again, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I want to give you a flavor for what's in there. So on this checklist is clearly define your child's needs and desired outcomes. This is really helpful as you're sitting down to do self-reflection and thinking about your child and what your child particularly needs, to also then kind of reflect on what you want those outcomes to be, what you hope those outcomes to be. And that's going to help you kind of form your plan, your advocacy plan for your student. Familiarize yourself with the educational policies and legal rights. Stay calm and focused during discussions. I know that can be hard to do, but it really does go a long way in helping with your advocacy. Maintain motivation and persistence. And again, there are several more really fantastic things on this checklist. And then the last sample I want to share with you, from Gifted Children Decoded, comes from chapter number 6, which is Parent Self-Care and Resilience. This is a chapter that I can't stress enough for parents. We invest so much of ourselves in our children, and we don't regret that at all, but it can take a toll on us. So it's really important that we practice self-care. So let me jump ahead. In this chapter, this section I'm going to share with you comes from 6.1, and it's the importance of self-care, prioritizing your well-being. Quick self-care activities can be a lifesaver for busy parents. Short mindfulness exercises such as deep breathing or brief meditation sessions can quickly reduce stress and promote relaxation. Taking a walk around the block or doing some stretching exercises can refresh your mind and your body. Engaging in a favorite hobby like reading a book or listening to music provides a mental break and a sense of pleasure. These small acts of self-care have a significant impact on your overall well-being. And you may be thinking, as I did as I was reading that, well, Joe, those are just common sense things. We all know these. Well, we can know them, but sometimes putting them into practice, at least for me, can be really difficult. So they provide a list of, oh, I don't know, maybe 8 to 10 different self-care activity ideas. So let me share just a couple of those with you. So a short mindfulness exercise, and I'm going to pull that one out because for me personally, mindfulness exercises are very grounding. And so I'm going to share that one with you. So a short mindfulness exercise could be try 5 minutes of a deep breathing session. Sit comfortably, close your eyes, and focus on your breath. Inhale slowly through the nose, hold for a few seconds, and exhale gently through your mouth. Again, common knowledge tips for the most part, but actually seeing it in print and thinking, okay, that sounds pretty easy. Let me just take a few minutes and do that. And it calms and can ground you. Some others, enjoying a favorite hobby. What are your favorite hobbies? My hobbies, let's see, I absolutely love reading, particularly thrillers. So if you have a recommendation, let me know. Um, I also enjoy cooking and experimenting with new recipes, and I'm about to engage in attempting sourdough for the first time. So cross your fingers for me. So what are your hobbies? What are the things that you enjoy doing? So in the author's words, dedicate 15 minutes to read a chapter of a book you love or listen to your favorite music. Immerse yourself in the activity and let it bring you joy and relaxation. And then one that I'm going to share, that may not be as common knowledge-y, if you will, is a sensory relaxation. And this is the author's recommending to fill a bowl with warm water and soak your hands or your feet for 5 minutes. Or hold a warm cup of coffee or a warm cup of tea and kind of savor that aroma and the warmth. You're focusing on simple sensory experiences, and that can be very calming. I guess perhaps I do that one without even thinking about it, as I almost always have a cup of coffee or tea sitting here with me, and I do enjoy taking a few moments to smell the aroma and feel the warmth on my hands. So again, those are just a few ideas. And then I had mentioned that they have throughout this book, pause and reflect. And there's a pause and reflect after this section. So let me just give you a sample real quick. They hadn't planned on doing that, but I'm going to go ahead and share that with you. So this pause and reflect says, pause for a moment and check in with yourself. When did you last do something purely for your enjoyment or relaxation? Reflect on one small self-care activity you could add to your routine this week, even if it's as simple as 5 minutes of quiet time with a cup of tea. So again, that was an example of the pause and reflect. The last thing I'll mention about this particular book is that it has some additional resources that are listed. It has the references, so you can always go to that and search out those articles and books as well. But then it also has a section that says, want more support for your journey? And it gives you a QR code, and it takes you to some additional resources that the author has. So again, that is a very quick review of Gifted Children Decoded. Definitely would recommend this book. Next, we have Doing Poorly on Purpose. This book, I find, provides really great strategies for students who may be underachieving, and it's a great self-help then for parents as well. So let me go through those contents with you. You see there on your screen the first 4 chapters, underachievement, viewing it from a student's perspective. I found that to be an extremely helpful chapter in kind of reframing or redirecting the way I was thinking about underachievement. The next chapter is a little light research. And then we have getting to A for autonomy, and then getting to A, access. All right, the next screen here, we have getting to A, advocacy. Then we have alternatives, aspirations, approachable educators. And then we have the epilogue, a story with chapters yet to be written. So that gives you an idea for the topics that are going to be found within this particular book. So some of the key highlights that I found for this book, it does provide a very broad range of topics and provides really good examples throughout the book. I don't know about you, but I'm one that I learn best when I'm kind of given the topic and then given an example to kind of reinforce that. And so this book I find is pretty good about doing that. The chapter summaries are really well done. Sometimes I will have read something and want to go back, and instead of having to read through the whole chapter to kind of see it, okay, am I in the right place in this book? That chapter summary is fantastic for giving you those nuggets that it's shared throughout the chapter. It also offers really strong practical tips that are pretty easy to implement. And then it also has a really good resource section as well. So let me share with you some samples in the author's own voice from this book. Let's start with chapter number 1. It's talking about underachievement and viewing it from that student perspective. Again, I found this chapter to be so helpful. So let me just read you this one section called More Conundrum Than Consensus. My Aunt Peggy was a sweet woman, but when it came to my career decision, she was not shy about telling me that she thought I had really underplayed the cards I'd been dealt. Always a smart kid in school, I earned a PhD in educational psychology at the age of 28. I was thrilled, if tired, and my parents were equally ecstatic. I was and remained the first and only member of my extended family to receive a doctorate. At my celebration party, Aunt Peggy sat me down and told me how proud she was of me and how much good credit I had given to our family name. Then she dropped the bombshell. You were always a smart kid, Jimmy, so it's a shame you didn't decide to become a real doctor. You know, a medical doctor, the kind of doctor who really helps people. Until the day she died, Aunt Peggy considered me an underachiever. Mind you, she had never ventured beyond high school herself, but her opinion of my doctorate was undercut by her unwillingness to consider a PhD a worthwhile degree for a smart kid like me. Isn't that interesting? Again, it provides just a slightly different glimpse of underachievement from the student perspective. As some other pieces that are found within this particular chapter, they call it issue 1. Underachievement is often a phenomenon based on personal opinion rather than established norms. There's another section here. There is no such thing as a classic underachiever. And Issue 3, underachievement may be caused by one or more of the following, like lack of interest, lack of challenge, lack of self-esteem, or a desire to receive negative attention over nothing at all. And this section is really interesting because it tells a story of 2 students who are kind of used then throughout the rest of the book. And it uses those 2 students and their development and path, if you will, to illustrate the different topics that are shared within the book. So I find that to be really good. Plus, it also uses other cultural contexts that are very relatable. For example, at one point, very early in the book, it uses the example of the movie The Breakfast Club. Anybody remember that movie? Have you seen it? one of my favorite movies from the 1980s, I believe. So again, it's a cultural reference, maybe a little dated now, but kind of that cult classic that a lot of people can relate to, have some memory or connection to. And again, it uses that then to pull out some important points and information to share. Let's jump over to chapter number 5 then. And chapter 5 is getting to A, advocacy. And I know I mentioned advocacy in the last one. I wanted to go ahead and do a kind of a follow-up, if you will, with advocacy, so you can kind of compare and contrast a little bit of the way these two different resources touch on that. So this one again is from chapter 5, and it's advocacy strategy number 2. Introduce students to the top 10 for talking to teachers. Think back to your own time in middle and high school. If you're like me, there was a solid line of demarcation between students and teachers. In other words, teachers distributed knowledge and content, and students were expected to absorb it. In most schools, as the grade levels got higher, so did the separation of students by either perceived ability or academic achievement. By the time junior year of high school rolled around, most students were in their core classes with the same batch of students, irrespective of the subject matter. The incorrect assumption of smart in one thing, smart in everything was definitely at play. And then I'm going to jump down a little bit. I don't recall being taught how to talk with a teacher, so my curriculum was a better match with my abilities or interests. So I often just sat there, paying attention when something the teacher said caught my attention, but mostly sitting back and daydreaming about being any place other than my Algebra 2 classroom. So as you progress through this chapter, then it gives this, you can see I've used it quite a bit, gives this great table of 10 tips for talking with teachers. And we don't teach our children that, but boy, this could be so beneficial. It could be beneficial to us as parents too. Let me give you just a couple, read the first couple on here. So make an appointment to meet and talk. This shows the teacher that you're serious and you have some understanding of his or her busy schedule. Tell the teacher about how much time you'll need, be flexible, and don't be late. The second tip then is, if you know other students who feel the way you do, consider approaching the teacher together. Choose words carefully. Be diplomatic, tactful, respectful, and so forth. And it's a 2-pager. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but it gives, like I said, really great tips for teaching our kiddos how to talk with a teacher, how to begin advocating for themselves. So that again, as they were expressing in the beginning of what the section that I was reading, the student is able to get the most out of their curriculum. That not only are they going to get the things they need to match those graduation requirements, but they're also going to be able to follow their interests and chase their passions. And a lot of times that starts with just those simple conversations with teachers and or guidance counselor to make those needs, interests, and wishes known. And then I'm going to jump over to chapter number 7, which is getting to A for aspirations. Elizabeth graduated as valedictorian, was a member of just about every club her high school offered, and earned multiple ribbons and trophies that document her academic prowess. Still. And then it provides some information, quotes directly from Elizabeth, from some research that Delisle conducted. So I'm going to go ahead and read that piece to you. In the pit of my stomach, and this is Elizabeth, in the pit of my stomach, I have a deep sense of unaccomplishment. Despite the armful of awards that seem to shout model student, I know the truth. I had never written a paper any earlier than the night before it was due. And studying for me consisted of cracking open the textbook only 1 or 2 or 3 times per semester. The glowing sense of victory I had always expected to show up at my high school graduation had stood me up. So again, a gifted student, lots of awards, lots of recognitions, lots of accomplishments. But how is she feeling there? Let's continue. Elizabeth goes on to document one reason for this pervasive disappointment she felt about her high school experience. My social studies teacher walked into the room, clapping his hands brusquely. Okay, class, we have 3 weeks until the end of the school year and 10 chapters to cover. Sound familiar? Turn to the section on the Korean War. We opened our books. All right, now raise your right hand and place it palm down over the first page. We looked around at one another, confused, but followed his instructions. Now we've covered it, said the teacher, his chins jiggling at the pun. Let's move on. We're not going to cover the Korean War, protested one student. You don't need to know about the Korean War unless you're Korean. A hand shot up in the back of the classroom. I'm Korean. Oh, well, you can read that chapter on your own. Unfortunately, this was the norm rather than the exception for a great chunk of my time in school. This story reveals an important caveat about underachievement. Sometimes it's not the student who underachieves, but the learning environment itself. So that gives you a little setup for what the rest of this particular chapter is talking about. But Elizabeth, while on the outside doesn't look to be an underachiever because of all the awards and accolades that she's received, but within herself feels to be an underachiever because she did not, her needs weren't being met. She wasn't stretching herself. She wasn't able to grow in the ways that she wanted and or needed to grow. So again, this book is a fantastic read. It's an easy read. Wonderful examples. Like I said at the beginning of this section, I really love stories, and it uses stories from actual research, not fabricated stories, to illustrate points and to draw out that important information that we as parents need. So again, definitely a good book. The next book we're going to talk about is Raising Twice Exceptional Children. This is a handbook for parents of neurodivergent gifted children. So you may have seen the phrase or heard the phrase 2E or twice exceptional. That 2E is the twice exceptional in the title. So let's take a look at the contents. On the screen in front of you, you can see it's broken down by parts. So in part one, we have understanding neurodiversity, giftedness, and twice exceptionality. And it has multiple sections within that. So what is neurodiversity? Gifted and. I didn't leave off the next word, gifted and. There can be lots of different things that follow that. And then identifying and understanding twice exceptionality. Let's go ahead and move to the next screen. And you can see part two is the parent toolkit. So in this section, it's kind of broken down to talking about twice exceptionality, communicating for connection, and effective co-parenting. And then you can see on section 3 or part 3 of the book, the 5 skills all twice exceptional kiddos need. We have self-advocacy, I'm struggling with that word today, self-advocacy, emotional regulation, executive functioning, effective social communication, and self-directed motivation. And then in part 4, we're finding the right academic fit. So assessing educational options, collaborating effectively with school, and then we have the final thoughts. So next, let's take a look at what I think the highlights of this book are. So some of the highlights that I find for this book are first, it has a really strong research foundation, and it provides throughout the book really good graphics and charts. I also really like that there's a chapter reflection. Again, I'm kind of big on that, being able to take a moment, step back, reflect on what I've read, what I've done. And this provides kind of that more of a guided type of reflection. It has excellent explanations and a setup for each topic. And then it goes into a really good depth in its explanations of each topic. Not so much that it's like overwhelming or too much. It's not at that practitioner level, but it does go into enough detail that as parents, I think we can feel that we have a solid foundation of knowledge to kind of help us with as we navigate through the different aspects of school and education and life in general with our kiddos. So next, let me go through again a few of the samples that I'm going to pull directly from this book. I thought we'd start with chapter number 3, which is identifying and understanding twice exceptionality. This section of the book does a really good job of going through and identifying a significant number of the specific learning disabilities that our gifted neurodivergent children may experience. It also covers a section where it's talking about it calls it, if memory serves, more than the five senses or something to that. So it's talking about not only the experiences that the children may have with seeing, feeling, touching, tasting, but also other senses as well. And I'm trying to find the section on that real quick, and it's not popping up. But it talks about other senses that we often don't think about, but can actually be really important to our students, again, that are gifted and neurodivergent. But again, back to this section of the different types of specific learning disorders. I'm going to read just a couple of them that they cover in this book. So learning disorders or disabilities such as dyslexia, dysgraphia. Then there are processing disorders such as the sensory auditory processing disorder, visual processing disorder. And then it goes into anxiety and depression, such as generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And then it goes into another section where it's talking about other types of twice exceptionality, which we might not often consider to be part of the 2E world, if you will, but they certainly are, such as bipolar, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, Tourette's syndrome, and so forth. So again, it does a great job of kind of going through these. I'm not reading them all to you. I wanted to kind of give you a taste for the ones that are found there. So let me just pick one, and I'm going to read that one to you. So again, you can hear from the author and kind of get a feel for the flavor of the writing within the book. So let's pick social anxiety disorder. So, fear of being judged or being caught in an awkward situation with no escape can cause kids and teens with social anxiety disorder, SAD, to avoid social situations, even when they would like to participate. If a child only becomes socially anxious around adults, but is comfortable around peers, they typically don't meet the criteria necessary for a diagnosis of SAD. Another manifestation of SAD that may impact gifted kids and teens is extreme test anxiety. More than being fearful of doing poorly on a test anxiety is often related to the fear of judgment when the assessment is graded. So it kind of gives you an idea for the information that's being shared by this author in each of those areas. Again, I really like this because it gives you a solid view of the topic, but it doesn't go into so much detail that you feel completely overwhelmed. And it gives you a starting place if you want to do more research on your own or kind of dive more into that. It gives you that starting foundation that you're going to need to be able to do that. The next section I wanted to jump to is section or chapter number 5, communicating for connection. Communication can be a struggle or challenge for a lot of our neurodivergent students. Who are also gifted. And so this section kind of goes through that. And again, breaks it into several sections. So, communicating for second order change, tools for communication, interpreting neurodivergent communication. What if my communication style doesn't align with my child's? The power of self-disclosure, and again, so much more in this chapter. Those are just a few of the things there that they're talking about. I wanted to share with you the self-reflection from this particular chapter. Again, I've mentioned how much I like doing self-reflection, and this I think is a good example of that. So this self-reflection is broken into 3 topics, if you will, or 3 sections where you can ask yourself questions. So let me read those to you. How would you describe the communication in your home? When does your family have productive and healthy communication? How does your neurodivergent child prefer to communicate? Are there situations that hold them back from communicating? How comfortable are you with using self-disclosure with your child? Are there situations where you think it could be a benefit to use more self-disclosure? These questions aren't those that you can necessarily have a quick answer with. You may have to spend some time really thinking about that, kind of taking a step back often and looking at it from different perspectives. But as you practice those self-reflective exercises throughout the book, it really does help you to not only feel more grounded, but have a much broader perspective and understanding of yourself and your gifted neurodivergent child, and kind of that dynamic within the family. And then you can start to see how that dynamic works outside of that family, outside of the family unit. So again, these self-reflection exercises, I'm a strong believer in. Okay, so let's take a look then at chapter number 8, which is skill 2 of emotional regulation. And I'm just going to read you a little section from this. Neurodivergent kids may have difficulty regulating their emotions for many reasons. Emotional deregulation is a frequent component of some neurodivergent diagnoses. ADHDers and autistic people frequently struggle with regulating their emotions. The main impact of mood and anxiety diagnoses is the impact on one's ability to regulate emotions. Gifted kids have heightened awareness and the ability to logically comprehend complex ethical and moral topics, but don't have the life experience and emotional regulation skills to manage the discomfort that can come along with them. Neurodivergent, twice exceptional kids are living in a world that wasn't created for them, triggering all kinds of difficulty with regulating emotions. I find that to be such a solid explanation. And as you go through this chapter, it talks about built-in anxiety. It talks about perfectionism and stress. It talks about rejection sensitivity, and then provides some steps and I don't want to use the word helping, but we're going to go with that, helping from the parent perspective using what they call the I-CAN method, I-CAN. So again, this is a wonderful handbook that's specifically for parents of twice exceptional students, so gifted and then whatever the neurodivergent diagnoses may be. So again, definitely a recommend. The bonus book that we're going to review today is A Parent's Guide to Gifted Children. If you were to take a look at the inside of this book, I have it completely marked up. I use this one constantly. This is actually, I think, my second copy of the book because the first one got so tattered. So very, very good book. Let's go over the contents. So first, it opens up with defining giftedness. It does an excellent job of kind of defining what that is. It goes over the characteristics of gifted children, communication, the key to relationships, motivation, enthusiasm, and underachievement. Chapter 5 is establishing discipline and teaching self-management. Chapter 6, intensity, perfectionism, and stress. Then we go into idealism, unhappiness, and depression, followed by acquaintances, friends, and peers, and then family relationships, specifically siblings and only children. And then rounding out this book, in chapter 10, we have values, traditions, and uniqueness, followed by complexities of successful parenting and children who are twice exceptional. Then chapter 13, how schools identify gifted children, followed by finding a good educational fit, and finally, finding professional help. Now let's take a look at some of those key benefits. Or instead of key benefits, how about key highlights? There we go. So the key highlights, again, from my perspective of this book, is it's comprehensive. With just the right amount of detail. It doesn't go into too much detail, but it definitely gives you a really strong, solid foundation. This is not written for a practitioner. It's definitely written for a parent. It doesn't assume what you know. So it may share information that you have familiarity with or basic familiarity with, but it just doesn't assume that you know already. And then it is definitely research-based with practical tips and really good recommendations. So next, let's jump into some of those samples that I want to share with you. So the first chapter I want to kind of take a quick little look at is chapter number 4, Motivation, Enthusiasm, and Underachievement. I love how this chapter starts out with a quote from a mother talking about her 7-year-old child. Let me read it to you. I'll never forget her first day of kindergarten. Bring back memories to all of you. She was so excited, she was almost vibrating. She couldn't wait to get in the schoolhouse door. I was eager to have her go to school because, frankly, she was wearing me out. She was a whirlwind of energy who never stopped talking or questioning. I love that. I think because for those of us that are parents of gifted high ability students, we can so relate with that because our kiddos can be that whirlwind of energy, constantly talking, constantly asking questions, and needing not just those surface responses that sometimes as parents we might give. They've got to really understand, and we've got to give some depth of answer. So I really love how that starts out and kind of sets that visual, if you will, for what's coming next. And so the next section, I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit. It's talking about why wouldn't a gifted child be motivated? To understand this question, it may help to think about situations when your own motivation lags. That makes it so relatable to me. You're not always motivated 100%. No one gives 100% all the time. So then I'm going to jump down again. There are many factors that influence motivation. It is usually not enough to simply know why a person is not reaching his potential. Most people understand why they should exercise or why they should clean out the garage, but knowing why doesn't change their behavior because other things are motivating them in other directions. That was an aha moment for me. Remember, if a child could change his motivation easily, he probably would have done it some time ago, and your garage would be tidy by the same principle. Instead, there's probably a good reason from your child's perspective not to change. When you see a lack of motivation in a gifted child, approach the situation by first considering some of the many factors that influence motivation. And then it goes on to talk about what some of those factors could be, such as health, family, relationships, and then a list of other factors. And then it provides this fantastic table of reasons for underachievement and decreased motivation. I'm going to share just a couple of those with you too. It's an attempt to fit in with peers. High achievement is not valued by classmates. I think as parents of gifted kids, we've probably all heard that one quite a bit. The assigned tasks just do not seem interesting, relevant, or important to your child's life. The underachievement is an expression of the child's desire to show independence. There's too much emphasis put on extrinsic incentives for achievement rather than intrinsic rewards of learning. And so again, this is a multi-page table that shares quite a few different reasons for underachievement and lack of motivation or decrease in motivation. So that gives you a little taste in the author's words on chapter 4. Let's jump ahead to chapter number 7, where we're going to jump into idealism, unhappiness, and depression. This chapter can be hard to read for some of us. But it provides a really good understanding for how the students' feelings of idealism or their personal unhappiness and depression can really impact and affect a student. So it starts off with sharing some statistics with how widespread is depression. And then it goes into talking about depression and suicide in gifted children, again, providing that solid research foundation with statistics, and then answering the question, which gifted children are more at risk? It talks about criticism and depression and then goes through the different symptoms of depression and how to prevent it. It talks a little bit about genetics and the environment and so forth. It is, like I said, it's a packed chapter that is really helpful. One of the sections that I find particularly interesting in this chapter is the one where it's talking about feeling disappointed in oneself. And I think that gifted children, for a lot of different reasons, can feel that emotion very strongly. So this does a really nice job of kind of going into that. It's I'm going to find this section here I want to read to you. Here we go. This is within that section on helping a child who is depressed. And one of the parts of that is giving emotional support. A child needs to feel that the person she has turned to really appreciates the depth of her concerns. Your support through careful listening and being there conveys to the child that she is an important person to someone, to you, despite how she feels about herself right now. And then it gives some tips, like if your child will tolerate physical touch, touching them on the shoulder, patting them on the back, giving them a hug. Though physical touch can be really important. Sometimes a child can get the needed emotional support from books and movies. In reading books in which the characters are dealing with issues such as loneliness or depression, a child can understand that others have felt the way she does, and she can get ideas for alternative ways of coping with the situations facing her. But be aware that some depressed children withdraw into books as a way of avoiding actions. Bibliotherapy is something that I recommend for a lot of different things. It's a great way for children of all ages to be able to see that the things they're dealing with aren't while they might feel unique and like they're the only ones that have ever experienced it, that there are others that have felt that, and they can, as this book was saying, they can see alternative ways of dealing with it. For really young children, bibliotherapy, you can use picture books and let them kind of develop the story from the pictures as they get older and can begin reading. There are a plethora of wonderful books out there with characters that are doing all kinds of things, going through all kinds of things that you can utilize to assist with that. Uh, Again, so that is the section on idealism, unhappiness, and depression. And then the final one, we're going to jump all the way to chapter number 14, finding a good education fit. We have a plethora of different types of school options, whether it's your hometown school, it's an online program, it's a homeschooling, it's you know, a variety of different types of schools. We have options now. And so making sure that we're finding the right educational fit for our kiddos is really vital. And sometimes that educational fit is within that hometown school system, but it's working with the school system to make sure that your child's needs are being met. And again, that goes back to the advocacy that we talked about in some of the other books, and making sure that that their needs are being met. So I want to read you just a section here that says, "Can't I simply trust the schools?" Although some schools have provisions for advanced learners, many do not. Even when programs exist, they're often minimal. We recommend, therefore, that parents learn as much as they can about the common traits of gifted children and about their own child's abilities in various areas before the child enters school. Parents of preschool children can keep mental or written notes of the child's behaviors. For older children, parents can provide after-school enrichment opportunities in which they can observe how quickly the child learns and how much interest she shows in various areas. So again, that's just kind of touching on that. But some of the things that you as a parent can do to get a really good solid foundation of understanding of what your child's needs are, what their learning type and style is, so that as you go into the educational system, the more formalized educational system, you have some statistics, or excuse me, you have some data about your own child. I also usually recommend that in addition to kind of keeping those mental or written notes, that you also keep copies of things that your child may do. So as a preschooler, if they're drawing something that seems to tell a story, or it's advanced artistic work, keep copies of that. If you were watching them play and it seems to be an advanced level of play, maybe grab a quick video or a picture of that. As they get older and are writing stories or doing math papers or science projects and that sort of thing, you can keep copies of that to kind of build a portfolio on your child. So then it goes into different ways that you can work with the school system. And I won't go into all of these, but it talks about some of the pull-out programs and differentiation within the regular classroom, and acceleration and clustering, and those different types of options that you may be able to work with your school system to provide your gifted child. One of the things that I absolutely love about this particular chapter, though, is it has a table on questions more important than, "Is my child in a gifted program?" And I want to share a few of these with you. So one of the questions is, how does my child learn best? How does my child's school program take into account students' personal characteristics and learning styles? In what academic content areas or extracurricular areas does my child display strengths, talents, or special interests? What specific provisions are made for students to learn at their own rate or pace, rather than being limited to a rigidly prescribed lockstep curriculum? How does my child's school provide students with access to and experiences with other students and adults who share their strengths, talents, and interests, and so forth? There are several other really good questions. Actually, there are 25 in all. Questions that we need to ask instead of focusing just on that, is my child in a gifted program? Does your school have a gifted program? These questions kind of hone our thoughts, if you will, so that we're focusing on the different needs of the child and how the school, regardless of gifted program, how the school can meet those particular needs. So that's kind of a quick run through of A Parent's Guide to Gifted Students. So, just as a quick summary, if you will, the book Gifted Children Decoded does a fantastic job of kind of talking through some of those unique characteristics for gifted students in a way that is easy to understand. If you're starting your journey with your gifted child, this would probably be one of the first books that I would grab. Doing Poorly on Purpose, fantastic strategies to deal with and even reverse underachievement in our gifted students. So if you find as you're walking this journey with your kiddos that they may be displaying underachievement or starting to edge or struggle on that, this is an excellent book to check out. Again, well written, good research foundation, great tips. If you're raising a twice exceptional child, this is a fantastic handbook. It research-based, great examples, good advice, easy to read, goes into just enough information, doesn't become and or feel overwhelming. Definitely recommend. And then finally, my old standby, like I said, this is probably my favorite of the parent handbooks for gifted children. Fantastic research base, great examples, good reflection, great tables. Yeah, this is a good standard. I highly recommend this as well. There are lots of fantastic books and resources out there to help with all different aspects of raising our gifted kiddos, our twice exceptional kiddos, our underachieving kiddos, and so forth. So if I would start with these books, and if you need additional recommendations, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'd be happy to provide you with some additional resources. Likewise, in the back of each of these, I think each one of these actually gives you a list of the resources that they've drawn upon. And that, again, is another fantastic place to kind of do a deeper dive. Thank you so much for joining me today as we've reviewed several books in the field of high ability gifted education. On the screen there in front of you, you're going to see two QR codes. The one on the left is for upcoming programs and visit opportunities, including our next in the gifted education series, which will be on advocating for our highly gifted children. The QR code there on the right-hand side is if you want to schedule a virtual or in-person appointment with me. I would be more than happy to meet with you and talk with you. You'll also find on the screen there in front of you my email address as well as my telephone number. Again, please reach out if you have any questions, if you need more resources, if you'd like to talk about any of these books in more depth or any topics within the field of gifted education. Remember, giftedness isn't a destination. It's a journey worth guiding. And I thank you so much for walking alongside the journey of your gifted student.